The Galactic Council thought they were about to witness the humiliation of humanity. They built an arena specifically designed to contain the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, invited representatives from 47 species to watch, and unleashed their 3 most terrifying champions against a single human marine. What they got instead was a 200-meter-wide crater, a traumatized psychic entity suffering from her first earworm, and a very hungry Marine Corporal asking if anyone knew where to get a decent burger. This is the story of how one bored human with a piece of chewing gum accidentally ended gladiatorial combat across the entire galaxy, and why the words minor structural issues are now banned from official military reports. The pristine dome of the Ultimate Predator Arena gleamed like a jewel against the purple sky of Corvash 7. Ambassador Krelix adjusted his ceremonial robes for the 3rd time, was watching as transport vessels from 47 different species descended like metallic rain onto the landing platforms. Today would be historic, he mused. Today the galaxy would finally witness the end of human arrogance. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings of indeterminate gender classification, boomed the voice of Blixnar, the arena's lead announcer. His 6 eyes sparkled with anticipation as he hovered above the crowd on his anti-gravity platform. Welcome to the most spectacular event in galactic history. The crowd erupted in a symphony of clicks, roars, and electronic beeps that passed for applause across the cosmos. Tentacled Zephyrians waved their appendages, while insectoid Keth-Ari rubbed their wings together in excitement. Even the stoic granite lords had bothered to show up, their massive stone forms casting shadows across the arena floor. For too long, Blixnar continued, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain, we have endured the insufferable bragging of these humans. These soft, pink creatures from a backwater planet who dare to call themselves warriors. Well, today we put an end to their delusions. A holographic display materialized above the arena, showing 3 imposing figures that made several smaller species in the audience shudder involuntarily. Behold our champions. Blixnar's voice reached fever pitch. First, the terror of the Skull Nebula Gorak, the Bone Crusher. The image showed a massive reptilian beast covered in natural bone armor, each plate scarred from countless battles. His claws could slice through titanium like tissue paper. Second, the nightmare of the PSI Wars, Inthia the Mind Ripper. The second figure appeared almost ethereal, a being of pure psychic energy that could tear thoughts from minds and turn sanity inside out with a casual gesture. And finally, the living weapon that ended the Plasma Rebellion's Thorn, the Plasma Beast. The 3rd champion blazed with internal fire, its body a constantly shifting mass of superheated energy that could melt steel with its breath. Krelix nodded approvingly. Each champion had been chosen specifically to counter what limited intelligence they had gathered about human combat capabilities. Brute force, mental warfare, and energy attacks. Surely no single being could survive all 3. These mighty warriors, Blixnar announced with obvious glee, will face one pathetic human soldier in our magnificent arena. An arena designed to contain the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Place your bets now, because this will be over quickly. The crowd's excitement reached a crescendo as holographic betting displays lit up across the stadium. The odds against the human were astronomical. Some species were already planning their victory celebrations. If only they knew what was coming. The arena's main gate hissed open with unnecessary dramatic flair, releasing a cloud of synthetic fog that was supposed to make entrances more intimidating. Out of this theatrical mist stepped, well, honestly, it was kind of disappointing. Marine Corporal Jake Morrison shuffled into the arena like he was heading to a particularly boring staff meeting. His standard-issue combat gear looked laughably primitive compared to the gleaming technology surrounding him. No energy shields, no plasma cannons, no psychic amplifiers, just Kevlar ceramic plates, and what appeared to be was he actually chewing gum. Behold. Blixnar's voice cracked slightly with suppressed laughter. A mighty human warrior. Look upon his fearsome fabric armor and tremble. The audience erupted in a mixture of confused chittering and outright mockery. Several Keth-Ari delegates were pointing at Jake's equipment with their antenna, clearly amused by what they perceived as Stone Age technology. Jake, meanwhile, had stopped in the center of the arena and was looking around with mild interest. He popped a small bubble with his gum, the sound somehow carrying across the vast space in the sudden quiet. "Hey," Jake called up toward the announcer booth, one hand shading his eyes against the arena lights. "Is there like a snack bar or something? Because this looks like it might take a while and I skipped lunch." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the betting displays seemed to pause in confusion. The human Blixnar stammered, clearly thrown off his prepared script. "The human appears to be asking about refreshments?" What the aliens didn't notice, because they were too busy laughing at his casual demeanor, was that Jake's eyes were methodically cataloging every structural support beam, every power conduit, and every obvious design flaw in their impenetrable arena. He'd already spotted at least 12 ways to bring the whole thing down. But first, he really could use a sandwich. Enough of this mockery. Blixnar's voice boomed across the arena, clearly irritated by the human's lack of proper fear. "Release Gorak, the Bone Crusher. Let us see how amusing this Deathworlder finds 12 feet of pure killing machine." The arena floor split open with mechanical precision, revealing a circular platform that rose slowly from the depths. On it stood Gorak, and even Jake had to admit the creature was genuinely impressive. Bone plates covered every inch of his reptilian hide, each piece layered like natural-scale mail that had been forged in the fires of 100 battlefields. His claws gleamed wickedly in the arena lights, each one capable of punching through starship hulls. The crowd fell silent as Gorak let out a bone-rattling roar that echoed off the dome walls. Several smaller species in the audience actually fainted. Jake just blew another bubble. "Oh, wow," he said conversationally, still looking around the arena. "That's definitely going to leave a mark if he catches me. Good thing I'm not planning to let him catch me." Gorak didn't appreciate being ignored. With a howl of rage that made the arena's support beams vibrate, he launched himself forward with surprising speed for something his size. His claws tore gouges in the reinforced floor as he charged, bone armor clattering like a freight train full of death. Jake waited until the last possible second, then casually sidestepped and tapped a control panel he'd noticed embedded in the arena wall. What happened next defied every expectation the audience had about how gladiatorial combat was supposed to work. The arena's gravity generators, designed to create varying combat conditions, suddenly reversed polarity in a localized field around Gorak. The bone-armored champion, who had been charging at roughly 60 miles per hour, suddenly found himself experiencing negative gravity while maintaining all of his forward momentum. Jake observed, watching as Gorak rocketed toward the arena's ceiling like a very confused, very angry missile. "Your engineers really should have put safety locks on those controls." The impact when Gorak hit the reinforced dome was memorable. Bone armor that had withstood plasma cannons and molecular disruptors shattered like glass against basic physics and structural engineering. The champion that had terrorized 3 star systems became a very messy splat pattern across approximately 50 square feet of ceiling. A single piece of bone armor fell back down and landed at Jake's feet with a hollow clang. "Well," he said, picking up the fragment and examining it with professional interest, "that's one way to test your arena's structural integrity. You might want to hose that down before the next event." The silence in the arena was so complete that Jake's gum popping sounded like gunshots. Blixnar's voice, when it finally returned, had lost most of its theatrical confidence. "Well, that was unexpected. But surely our next champion will fare better. Behold the psychic terror of the galaxy, Inthea the Mind Ripper." The second platform rose with considerably less fanfare than the first. Inthea appeared as a shimmering, translucent figure, her form constantly shifting between solid and ethereal. Tendrils of psychic energy crackled around her like purple lightning, and her eyes blazed with the power to shatter minds across star systems. "Prepare yourself, human," she spoke directly into Jake's mind, her voice echoing with otherworldly menace. "I will tear your sanity apart piece by piece, until you beg for the mercy of madness." Jake tilted his head thoughtfully. You know, that's probably the most original threat I've heard all week. Most people just go with the standard "I'm gonna kill you" routine. Points for creativity. Cynthia's form solidified as she focused her considerable psychic abilities on the human's mind. The audience watched in fascination as purple energy surrounded Jake's head, expecting to see him collapse into gibbering insanity at any moment. Instead, Jake's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance. "Oh, come on," he muttered. "Really? You're going to go digging around in there? Lady, that's like opening a door marked authorized personnel only and then complaining about what you find inside." Cynthia's confident smile faltered as she encountered the first layer of Jake's mental defenses. Where she expected to find fear, trauma, or exploitable weaknesses, she instead discovered what could only be described as organized chaos. Military tactical manuals sat right next to collections of terrible puns. Combat training memories were filed alongside every stupid joke he'd ever heard. What is this?" she gasped, recoiling slightly as she encountered a mental compartment labeled things that seemed funny at 3 a.m. "Oh, that's just basic human brain architecture," Jake explained helpfully, starting to hum a tune under his breath. "We compartmentalize everything. Keeps us sane. Well, relatively speaking." Cynthia pressed deeper, determined to find something she could use. Instead, she found herself trapped in a mental loop of song lyrics that Jake had been absent-mindedly humming. The same 4 bars, over and over with no apparent end in sight. "Make it stop," she screamed, clutching her translucent head. "What kind of psychological torture is this?" "Oh, that's just a song that gets stuck in your head. We call them earworms. Pretty much every human has at least 12 running simultaneously at any given time. Don't fight it, it just makes it worse." The psychic terror of 3 galaxies was now experiencing her first earworm, and it was not going well. The melody bounced around her consciousness like a rubber ball in a small room, impossible to escape or ignore. "Your mind," she whispered in horror, backing away from Jake as psychic energy flickered around her like a dying flame. "Your minds are chaotic, contradictory, and absolutely terrifying. How do you function with this mental noise?" Jake shrugged. "Coffee helps." Cynthia fled. The arena had fallen into an uncomfortable quiet, broken only by the sound of maintenance drones frantically trying to clean Gorak off the ceiling and Cynthia's distant sobbing from whatever dimension she'd retreated to. Blixnar's voice, when it returned, had acquired a distinctly nervous edge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, though his usual theatrical flair had been replaced by what sounded suspiciously like wishful thinking, "I present our final champion. The living weapon that ended the plasma rebellions. The terror that melted 3 moons. Thorn the plasma beast." The third platform didn't rise so much as erupt from the arena floor in a geyser of superheated gas. What emerged was less a creature and more a contained stellar event. Thorn's body pulsed with internal fire, his form constantly shifting between solid matter and pure energy. When he spoke, his voice crackled like a solar flare. Finally, Thorn rumbled, and the temperature in the arena immediately jumped 15 degrees. "A worthy opponent. I shall enjoy watching you burn, human." Jake looked up from where he'd been examining a piece of the arena's shattered flooring. "You know, that's actually kind of impressive. How hot do you run? Because I'm getting some serious thermal readings over here." Instead of answering, Thorn opened his mouth and released a stream of plasma that could have powered a small city. The energy beam carved through the air where Jake had been standing, melting a 20-foot section of the arena wall into glowing slag. Jake had, of course, already moved. He was now crouched behind what remained of Gorak's platform, apparently using a broken piece of bone armor as a makeshift shield while he rummaged through the arena's scattered debris. "Okay," he called out conversationally as another plasma blast turned the air above his head into superheated death. "That's definitely hot enough to cause some serious thermal expansion issues. Your builders really didn't think this through, did they?" Thorn unleashed a sustained barrage that turned half the arena into a molten wasteland. The audience in the upper tiers began frantically adjusting their environmental suits, as the temperature climbed toward unbearable levels. Several of the more heat-sensitive species had already evacuated to the climate-controlled observation decks. Burn. Thorn roared, pouring more energy into his attacks. Burn like the coward you are. Actually, Jake's voice came from somewhere in the superheated haze. I'm more of a problem solver than a coward. And right now, you're presenting me with a fascinating thermodynamics puzzle. What happened next would later be studied in engineering schools across the galaxy as a textbook example of creative problem solving under extreme pressure. Jake had been busy during Thorn's dramatic display, using the melted arena debris to construct what looked like a crude heat exchanger. He'd connected it to the arena's own cooling system, rerouted the thermal regulation conduits, and created what amounted to a giant heat sink directly beneath Thorn's position. See, the thing about plasma, Jake explained, his voice now coming from the arena's ventilation system, is that it's just really hot gas. And hot gas has predictable behavior patterns when you suddenly change the thermal gradient around it. Thorn realized something was wrong when his own plasma began swirling back toward him instead of outward. The superheated energy that should have been incinerating everything in its path was instead being drawn into Jake's improvised cooling system like water down a drain. What are you doing to me?" Thorn gasped as his internal temperature began dropping rapidly. "Basic thermal dynamics," Jake replied cheerfully. "Your plasma is following the heat gradient I created. Don't fight it, you'll just make the containment failure worse." Thorn, the living weapon that had ended civilizations, found himself trapped in a rapidly cooling prison of his own making, his plasma form condensing into something uncomfortably solid. The first sign that something had gone seriously wrong with the arena's structural integrity was a low, ominous groaning sound that seemed to come from the building itself. The second sign was when a massive support beam, weakened by Thorn's plasma barrage and thermal shock from Jake's improvised cooling system, he decided to take an unscheduled vacation from its load-bearing responsibilities. Blixnar's voice had lost all pretense of showmanship and now carried the distinct tone of someone realizing they might have made a terrible mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm while we assess the structural situation." The third sign was when the entire eastern wall of the arena began tilting at an angle that violated several fundamental laws of architecture. Panic, as it turned out, was a universal constant. It didn't matter if you were a silicon-based rock creature or a gaseous entity from the Crab Nebula. When a building started falling down around you, everyone had the same basic response: run around screaming and look for the exits. Unfortunately, the exits were currently blocked by approximately 3,000 tons of twisted metal and melted infrastructure. "Oh, for crying out loud," came Jake's voice from the arena floor, where he was calmly walking through the destruction like he was taking a leisurely stroll through a particularly dangerous park. This is what happens when you prioritize style over substance in your engineering. A section of the dome above began raining down chunks of reinforced polymer, each piece large enough to flatten a hover car. The audience members in the upper tiers pressed against the barriers, and their earlier bloodthirsty enthusiasm replaced by the very reasonable desire not to become part of the floor decoration. "Hey," Jake called up to them, apparently unconcerned by the fact that he was standing in what was rapidly becoming a very expensive pile of rubble. "Those emergency exit panels over there? The green ones? Try those?" Several Kethari delegates followed his suggestion and discovered that, yes, there were indeed emergency exits hidden behind decorative panels. Who knew? Who knew? "How did you know about the emergency systems?" Ambassador Krelix shouted down from his observation box, which was swaying in a way that suggested his premium seating might not be as premium as advertised. "Basic building code compliance," Jake replied, helping a group of smaller aliens navigate around a fallen beam. "Every public assembly structure has to have emergency egress routes. It's like Engineering 101. More aliens began following Jake's directions as he calmly pointed out structural weak points to avoid load-bearing walls that were still reliable and which sections of debris were safe to climb over. His commentary throughout this impromptu evacuation was a masterclass in sarcasm. "Watch that conduit there. It's carrying about 10,000 volts, and your superior insulation appears to be melting. Step around the plasma residue, unless you enjoy being dissolved at the molecular level. Oh. And maybe next time don't build your support columns out of decorative materials that can't actually support anything. Wait, called out Dr. Vex Non, a renowned Zephyrian engineer who was currently dangling from what remained of the VIP balcony. Are you saying you identified structural flaws in our arena? About 30 seconds after I walked in here, Jake confirmed, catching a falling piece of ceiling that would have flattened the doctor. Combat engineers tend to notice these things. Occupational hazard. Combat engineer? Blixnar's voice cracked. Oh yeah, Jake said cheerfully, helping boost a group of stranded granite lords over a collapsed wall that was easily twice his height. 23 years of building stuff, blowing stuff up, and figuring out how buildings fail under stress. Marine Corps just means I can also shoot people while I'm doing it. The aliens began to understand, with growing horror, that they hadn't just challenged a human warrior to combat. They'd trapped themselves in a building with a human who was professionally trained to identify and exploit structural weaknesses, improvise solutions from available materials, and remain calm under pressure that would send most species into catatonic shock. As Jake continued directing the evacuation with the casual efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before, it became painfully obvious that humans didn't just fight their way out of problems. They engineered their way out, and apparently they were very, very good at it. The ultimate predator arena, pride of the Galactic Council and supposed testament to superior alien engineering, finally gave up its fight against physics with a sound like thunder being fed through a meat grinder. What had once been a gleaming dome capable of containing the galaxy's most dangerous predators was now a smoking crater roughly 200 meters across and 30 meters deep. At the center of this impressive destruction, standing on the only piece of floor that remained intact, was Marine Corporal Jake Morrison. He was still chewing his gum. Emergency broadcast signals screamed across subspace networks, carrying live footage of the crater to every civilized system in the galaxy. The news anchors, trained professionals who had covered wars, natural disasters, and political scandals, found themselves struggling for words. We're receiving confirmation that the arena has completely collapsed, stammered Kikix Tal, the lead correspondent for Galactic News Network. The human appears to be unharmed, and is he actually checking his watch? Jake was, in fact, checking his watch. He looked up at the emergency response vessels circling overhead and gave a casual wave. Control, this is Morrison. He spoke into his comm unit with the same tone someone might use to report a minor traffic delay. Mission complete. Minor structural issues with the local architecture, but nothing unexpected. Recommend future diplomatic events avoid buildings constructed primarily for aesthetic purposes. The response from his commanding officer was loud enough to be heard by the hovering news crews. Minor structural issues? Morrison, you're standing in a crater that's visible from orbit. Well, sir, to be fair, I did warn them about the snack bar situation. Proper nutrition is important for optimal performance. Emergency teams began rappelling down into the crater, though they seemed unsure whether they were conducting a rescue operation or investigating a one-man natural disaster. The alien medical teams kept scanning Jake with increasingly confused expressions, apparently unable to understand how he remained completely uninjured while standing in the epicenter of what looked like a localized apocalypse. The human's vital signs are normal, reported Chief Medical Officer Thylix to the emergency coordinator. No signs of shock, trauma, or stress. His heart rate suggests he's slightly bored. Meanwhile, in the emergency session of the Galactic Council, the mood was significantly less calm. How? Chancellor Vorth's voice echoed through the council chamber as he gestured at the live footage of the crater. How did one primitive Deathworlder destroy our greatest arena? Ambassador Krelix, who had somehow survived the collapse by following Jake's evacuation instructions, cleared his throat nervously. It appears, Chancellor, that we may have slightly underestimated human capabilities. Slightly? The emergency council session lasted 18 hours and resulted in an official proclamation that was broadcast across all inhabited systems. By unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, humans are hereby prohibited from participating in any form of gladiatorial combat, arena warfare, or competitive destruction events. Furthermore, any facility hosting humans for entertainment purposes must first undergo structural inspection by certified human engineers. This decree is effective immediately and applies retroactively to all pending contracts. Down in the crater, in Tau, Jake had finally been reached by the rescue teams and was now sitting on a piece of rubble while medics insisted on checking him for injuries he clearly didn't have. So, ew, he said to the Zephyrian paramedic who was scanning him for the fourth time. This might be a weird question, but does anyone know where I can get a decent burger on this planet? Because all this problem-solving has worked up quite an appetite. And I'm pretty sure your emergency rations are going to taste like cardboard. The paramedic stared at him for a long moment, then quietly updated his medical report. Patient appears to be hungry.